There's been a couple of sneak peeks into the Dungeon Master's Guide.
I like the toolbox.
We know some people don't necessarily want to stray away from D&D when they want to do a different type of like genre in their TTRPGs.
Greyhawk. It doesn't seem like it's being primed as an IP.
Large percentage of the hobby has come in since Greyhawk has stopped being sold.
If you're going to create a world, here is one way you could do it, using this as an example.
The Dungeons & Dragons movie, Honor Among Thieves. Performing really well on streaming, apparently.
Show a darker version, show a horror. Let's do Ravenloft.
How would you handle the death of a long-standing and beloved Beastmaster companion? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG and gaming convention podcast in all the realms. We're going 2 for 2 these weekends, recording both episodes at a convention. My name's Ben Byrne, if this is the first podcast that you're listening to out there in the ether. And I am joined, as always, never not, by LaTia Jacquise, Joe Rasso, Shawn Merwin. And Shawn, I'm going to ask you, Gamehole Con, how many times have you been now?
I am a level 7 Gamehole Con attendee. That's correct.
What keeps you coming back to this convention? What makes this convention special?
I was going to say either a car or an airplane, depending. What keeps me coming back are the people that are here, both the creators who I've worked with and the fans and the people I've gamed with either once or 100 times. Keep me coming back because I love playing games. I love doing these panels. I love attending panels. This is my favorite convention. Straight up.
That's a big claim. Your favorite convention ever. LaTia, you said as well when we were talking about doing this that Gamehole is one that you kind of mark on your calendar each year to come to every
absolutely.
year.
This is my 6th one. You got one up on me, Shawn. And similarly to Shawn, like not only is it right in my backyard, because, you know, I'm based out of Chicago, but I like to think that this is the convention where my kind of journey into the industry began. Okay. I began volunteering here in the Adventurers League Hall in 2018 and 2019. And that just kind of gave me the experience and visibility that I needed to eventually become an Adventurers League admin. Mm-hmm. And then that gave me the community management experience that I needed to go forth and become a community manager in other fields where I am now. And I credit the people and just the mood and the vibes of this convention with just like making me realize that this is a place where I can be and I can do really cool stuff. And so I keep coming back so that I can keep doing cool stuff and encouraging other people to keep doing cool stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Joe Rasso, how many times have you punched your Gamehole Con card?
If I ignore you, I'm the junior one of these. I'm only a 5-timer.
Okay.
But my experience is similar to yours in that the first convention I came to, I didn't actually sign up for any games. I just went and listened to every single panel I could. At the time, I'd done a few things on the DMs Guild, and I was going, yeah, this writing thing's kind of cool. Maybe it's something I can do. And I sat in those panels and I got to listen to all these industry folks talk about stuff that I dreamed about doing. And I was starting to do, hey, yeah, I do that. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. And it was one of those, maybe this is a real possibility. So a lot of me thinks that what I'm doing now with Ghostfire really started by me coming here to Gamehole Con and listening to all the cool folks. And so now I look forward to meeting everybody in the industry here because it's small enough that you can easily bump into folks you've met before and have real meaningful conversations, not be rushed and carried off in the flow of a gigantic Gen Con or something. So yeah, I agree with Shawn. This is absolutely one of my favorites.
So when people ask, because we get this question from time to time, even on the Lorecast, people email in and ask, like, I really want to be in the industry. How do I get in? Go to Gamehole Con. Is that the new answer that I'm hearing?
It's one way.
It's a way.
It's a way. It's the industry now and the means of entry, I think, are on one hand completely different from how many of us got in years and years ago. But also there are so many new avenues to get in.
Sure.
But I think that Gamehole Con is definitely one way to do that. The panels and seminars here are phenomenal, and some are unmatched, and you get these opportunities to speak with people, like you said, in a more intimate setting than just like, oh, hey, how are you? Oh, hey, goodbye, when you're going somewhere at Gen Con. So yeah, it's definitely a way.
If you're going to get into the industry in any way, do what you love to do it well, and do it with everything you have. When LaTia joined the Adventurers League, you knew she was going to do great things. I am completely serious, because you live your joy. And if you live your joy, people will recognize that. And if you're good at what you do, and if you live your joy, no one can stop you. You may not be writing for Wizards of the Coast at the end of the day, but you will be doing the thing that you love, and people will recognize that you do it with joy and do it well. So whether you volunteer to game master, if you want to be a writer, if you want to make games, volunteer to run games, present your stuff in front of people, do a panel if you can about something that you know about, and get that experience. And when you fail the first time, learn and then do it again next time a little bit better.
For me, Gamehole is just one of the tools that you as a creator have to expand the stuff that you can do. Ultimately, it's on you to do the hard work needed to move down the road to where you want to get to.
For sure, yeah. I didn't mean to imply that, like, show up and you'll magically be in the industry now. It'll just, like, happen. This is my first Gamehole Con, and a lot of what you're saying is definitely resonating in terms of, like, Gen Con is so full on and so fast paced, and the vendor hall is filled with 100 very stressed people right before doors open, trying to get their booths in order, and do they have all their stock, and they're waiting for the wave of people that's going to crash into the convention hall. And then before doors opened on the vendor hall at Gamehole Con, everybody was chill. Everybody was like talking to each other between the booths. They were, had everything set up and kind of ready to go. Like the overall smaller scale of it makes this feel kind of more community-like than Gen Con is necessarily, because Gen Con is so massive. And for me as well, I agree. I've had the opportunity to run into people who, living in Australia, most folk I know in the industry, I know through a computer screen on the other side of the world. And it's been really fun and enjoyable running into people here like Scott Fitzgerald-Gray, who I've only met a couple times online, but running into him and Mike Shea and those sort of folks. And being at a panel that Shawn was on last night was really enjoyable, because it felt, a panel like that had those people on it would have, I feel, been like a packed hall at Gen Con. Whereas here, it was 20, 30 people in the room, but it just felt like, a bunch of people hanging out. It's got that real kind of around a campfire vibe to it. There's been a couple of sneak peeks into the Dungeon Master's Guide for the 2024 rulebook. Couple of different things. I think this book, I haven't been able to see inside it myself yet, but just from what I was reading on EN World and a couple of other spaces, this seems really cool. This seems really practical, really pragmatic as a book. Split into obviously different sections. It's not clear in my head what the chapter breakout is or anything like that. So this is going to be a little bit scattershot. But the first thing I really liked about it that I was reading was the much, much, much simpler encounter builder kind of design that's in there. It feels very wargamey for a GM, which is basically a game master sets how difficult they want the combat to be, from very difficult down to not that difficult at all. And lots of budget based on, I believe, the level of the characters, and then just adds the XP of all the monsters together until you hit where you want that encounter to be. There's none of that like multiplying based on how many monsters there are or anything. And I remember when I first started GMing, I would sit with that page of the 2014 DMG open, doing math, trying to like make sure my encounters were balanced, until I got to a place where I felt like a chef who just cooks with their hands, and I'm just like, sprinkle on a few more goblins. I know I can do this all by hand now. But do you think that's useful for new GMs? Do we like that change, generally speaking?
I like from what I've heard, the overall layout of the book and what they've decided to put in and not.
Sure.
And I think it's useful, well, because they are very smart people making this book. I think the lead designers were Chris Perkins and James Wyatt, who've been around D&D for a while, between the two of them. And plus they have the luxury of having the old book there already. So we can go back and we can do some different things. We can simplify here or make a little more complex here if we think we need to. And it sounds like that's what they were doing with the encounter builder, which is useful, especially for newer DMs.
Yeah.
To be able to, without having to go into the higher math of multiplication, for me, which it is, and just say, okay, I'm in the ballpark here. Now let's play it and see how it actually works. I think that's the important thing of just giving that baseline and then letting DMs learn, because that's where you can begin to cook with your hands.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of having tool sets for DMs to use. And if I think back to the previous edition, 4th edition, I love that as a DM to build encounters, because you had, I need an artillery, or I need a big tanky guy in front. And it made building encounters that I want to throw at my players really easy. And I did find the challenge with 5th edition coming in, I had to think a little bit more in terms of how I structured it. So having more tools to build that sounds awesome.
The DMG seems a little bit more the 2024 one specifically seems a little bit more targeted towards new GMs. I think that's probably the right call, especially because as you become more experienced as a GM, maybe you need a guide less. Although you probably still use it for magic item glossary and things like that. But of the tools that you've seen in it, is there anything that jumps out at any of you that you think is particularly useful for yourself or for a new GM?
I like the toolbox.
Toolbox is amazing.
Yeah, where they say, instead of telling you sequentially, we're going to do it alphabetically. And so if you need to, they've come up to a door and they're examining the door. There's a door section. Let me go to the door section and I will see what I could do.
That's fantastic.
To either get them smoothly past the door, which could take a half hour for a regular door, or mess with them with this door.
As a lovely anecdote, when I recently started going out with my wife, and we did a boys' weekend up to the cottage. I'm going to play D&D with my buddies up the cottage. Lorraine, you wanna come along with it? She go, okay. How? She was not a gamer. Still is not a gamer. She was sitting on the couch reading whatever magazine while I was running my buddies through an encounter, and they came up to a door. 2 hours later, she goes, just open the damn door from at the back of the couch. So
the story checks out.
Yeah.
I agree. I love the GM toolbox, and I'm so glad you brought up the door thing, because I was reading the list of features and it's like, you need to know, or maybe something you want to know about is alignment, the dichotomy between good and evil, and how to run a chase scene where there's an action and people are running through the streets. And what about magical contagions that can spread from one character to another? Or how do you deal with death in your campaign because it may come up inevitably? How do you open a door? It was like, one of these things is not like the others, but yet only D&D people will get it.
I was going to say, only to people who have played D&D, that is just as important as how to prevent magical contagion spread.
Absolutely.
In one campaign, I was a player. The first damage done to the party in the campaign was a soggy door, and they ended up hurting themselves. I was not involved, but a soggy door got a couple people almost bloodied.
At least it wasn't a dread gazebo. So.
No dread gazebo, but it was close.
Shawn, I feel like we need to keep reminding you this is a PG-rated podcast.
No soggy door.
Yeah, come on. I really like there was something in the GM toolbox which was fear and mental stress.
Yes, that is one of my favorite new parts of the toolbox. I have gotten to read through the Dungeon Master's Guide. I didn't spend very long in the toolbox because I got lost in the magic items chapter.
Sure.
It's a mechanic that a lot of GMs are adding into D&D lately. It's much more prevalent in some other TTRPGs, but I really enjoy that they decided that this is something that we're going to include, and we're going to give you guidelines on how to manage that, because we know some people don't necessarily want to stray away from D&D when they want to do a different type of genre in their TTRPGs. And from what I have seen so far, it's a very neat way and very good way to kind of handle that.
Yeah, absolutely. The concept that has been in role-playing games, D&D, Call of Cthulhu, of mental stresses that have been communicated in ways that have been problematic in the past, poor representations of mental health and the concept of sanity and how the human brain works, and kind of stigmatizing the concept of sanity. I think I liked the idea that you can be confronted by something so horrific that not that it pulls your sanity away or sends you insane, but it's just so frightening you can't function, And I think that term that they've fallen upon, mental stress, is so perfect that when I read that, I was like, oh my God, that's great. That's exactly what I want the players to feel is a sense of kind of stress and distraughtness that doesn't necessarily suggest behaviors that are, indicative of real world mental illness, So I thought that was great too. Greyhawk is being primed as the setting that's going to be in the Dungeon Master's Guide. But from what I can tell, again, without having peeked inside the book, it doesn't seem like it's being primed as an IP necessarily, as much as it is just an example world for GMs to kind of either use and template their games upon, or just if you want to world build for a game, this is how to do it.
That's exactly what it is. So from what I have heard from Chris Perkins and James Wyatt, it's like, you have it's the continent, right? I think I'm saying that right. The continent of Greyhawk, and then the city of Greyhawk, which is a bit more fleshed out than the rest of it. And then as you kind of get further and further out from Greyhawk, there's less and less and less that is described what's the word I'm looking for, in detail for you. So that as you kind of expand your game, if you choose to play in the world of Greyhawk, it's up to you and the game master and the players to invent what is beyond the walls of Greyhawk. It's a very cool chapter. I know next to nothing about Greyhawk, and so it's very exciting for me as a person who has not experienced any of that to go in there and be like, okay, so this is kind of where, this is kind of where everything kind of got started, and go from there. It's a really great little gazetteer.
Yeah, I think it's probably a great appetizer for new folks to discover a world they probably haven't encountered before.
Sure.
I would assume that now a large percentage of the hobby has come in since Greyhawk has stopped being sold. So having a little omnibus that gives you this is Greyhawk, this is cool. There's so much old stuff that you can find on the webs to.
We prefer vintage rather than old.
Fair enough. And I believe the penultimate podcast discussed this previously, that Shawn may or may not be a part of.
We did on the number 2 podcast in all the realms, Mastering Dungeons. Teos and I, who came into the industry not as players but as actual designers, with the Living Greyhawk organized play campaign. So I didn't play in Greyhawk as a kid, but when I joined that campaign and became one of the administrators, I had to become quickly steeped in its lore. And so when Teos and I heard that Greyhawk was going to be discussed in the new Dungeon Master's Guide, we immediately went back to all our books and did a quick 12-week or 14-week look at Greyhawk and the book that we had used, the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer, to create our content from. It looks like, from what I've heard, there isn't going to be a detailed deep dive into it, but it will be, as Joe said, the omnibus. If you're going to create a world, here is one way you could do it, using this as an example. And if, like you said, if you want to go back and buy some of the stuff on the DM's Guild, you can totally do so, or make your own world using this as an example. And I think it's a great way to get people into that world building mindset, to say how you do it and then to give an example is teaching 101.
Yeah, it feels like it's good for GMs. It's a good seed for GMs in both directions, because when I started playing D&D, I was getting ready to be like, all right, the Forgotten Realms, what is this place? And immediately got massively intimidated by the wealth of lore that there is for the realms, and not wanting to get an answer wrong, not because I was afraid of being wrong in quotation marks, but I didn't want to end up creating problems for myself further down the road when something in an adventure contradicted something I had said earlier, and feeling like I needed to have an encyclopedic knowledge of that world to be able to run a game there, which is why I started homebrewing my own world immediately, because I was like, well, I just make up the answer and it doesn't matter. Like, I can make it fit to how I want it to fit regardless. Not every GM loves world building purely by themselves. Some GMs love world building alone, and some GMs like that middle ground. I think if you open this new DMG, you see Greyhawk there, you don't feel overwhelmed because in theory, everything you need to know about Greyhawk to run a game there is in this book. You don't need, and you can make up the rest. You don't need the encyclopedic knowledge. If you're a GM who prefers to have more of an established setting, there's so much about Greyhawk you can get online. But if you're a GM who prefers to kind of flesh it out yourself, there's room for that in this new book. And if you're a GM who prefers to invent whole cloth, it acts as an example for that. So I think it's that perfect middle ground between those polars.
And then in the DMG, I believe we also get a 1 or half page, 1 page, 2 page adventure.
Yeah.
And this is how you can put an adventure together. You don't need it to be 32 pages. Here is 1 page that takes you through a session. So you've got that, you've got a place to put those adventures, and then you've got the toolbox to build the encounters and the things that happen during those things. So all those pieces are there for a new DM to do all the things they need to do to be the full DM that goes out into the world and runs games for people.
Well, speaking of new DMs, I'm sure many were created after seeing the Dungeons & Dragons movie, Honor Among Thieves. This is just a quick little bit of news. Michael J. Pastor highlighted it to me, although I had seen it around as well. We've discussed on the Lorecast before that movie kind of came out and didn't perform as well in the box office as I think certain people were hoping. Certainly, I think people who saw it were like, really? That only did that? Shawn did predict it was going to get absolutely crushed by Mario, and I thought the opposite, but, more the fool me. But it's performing really well on streaming, apparently. It's like a hit on Netflix. I think it was on Amazon before that, and was doing really well there. So we don't know. I don't expect anyone on this panel, for the record, to know the answer to this, but maybe this means that we're going to get another movie.
I want another one.
Yeah, I greatly enjoyed it. My whole family went and watched the show, and it was fantastic. I was disappointed that it didn't get the box office number that would call it a success, but sure. I think looking at all the numbers from all the other bits, it's hard not to call it one.
I feel like it is a creative success. Like, as a piece of artwork, as a film, it's 1000% a success. As
a fantasy D&D movie, having lived through previous versions of fantasy D&D movies, heck yeah. It was my gaming group and significant others and family all went and laughed and loved it and said, that's the D&D movie we've been waiting for. Right there. Wouldn't change a thing about it.
And this is where we cue James Hake doing the Jeremy Irons line of like blood rain from the sky.
Blood rain from the sky. Yeah. And hopefully seeing the success of it on the streaming platforms will let not necessarily Wizards of the Coast, but other creators, other folks out there who have loved D&D and been inspired by it and have their lives changed by role-playing games be able to say, well, I'm not playing D&D right now, but I remember playing it and I'm a film producer. Let's see what I can do. And then we get even more entertainment and fun and further fun out of this hobby that we love.
This is pure wish listing, but what would you want out of a sequel to a D&D? Would you want the same cast, the same world, the same story? Or is there something else you'd love to see in a D&D movie that you think captures it?
I would like to see, as we saw with things like Marvel, where you had the normal superhero stuff, and then you had the heist movie, and then you had this movie to show that, yes, this is what D&D is. This is also what D&D is. And you don't want to go off in such strange and like super dramatic direction, but you maybe show a little bit more serious side of what it could be, or show a darker version, show a horror. Let's do Ravenloft. Let's do a Ravenloft one. Let's do a Spelljammer. one. Let's do some things like that to show that this game is more than just people with swords and loots.
Sure.
For me, in my D&D media, there's nothing that I love more than a callback. So I would love to see, if a second movie ever happened, a new party, but with those, like, not saturated with references to Honor Among Thieves,
Sure.
but enough to make you realize that, yes, it's the same world. This adventure is happening in a world where Honor Among Thieves did happen. And, we might see... the Paladin Zank, he was that one who was like, I am here for this thing, and now I am going off to my next thing. And like, I don't want him to be a through line, but like something that just lets you know that this is the same world. These different stories and adventures can happen in that same world.
As long as he has a little boulder he could jump off.
Absolutely.
I always forget about Zank, and yet whenever I'm always reminded he's 1000% my favorite part of that movie. And I would love the continuity of the D&D films to be different parties each time.
And he just walks straight through them.
Rocks up like halfway through, instantly zip zap zoing, fixes all their problems, and then disappears again before the end of the movie. That would be great. I would love to see those characters again, to be honest. I thought that party worked really well. I thought they were charming as hell. And I'd love to see them put in different parts of the realms or different parts of the whether they go realm hopping or whatever. I can just imagine Chris Pine's character, was it Edgar or Edgin?
Edgin.
Kind of saying like, no, let's go. I've got a boat. We'll go on the high sea. It'll be great. Smash cut, salt marsh, and it's all like raining and storms and Swagan trying to climb their way onto the boat. It'll be great. Speaking of Swagan trying to, I think I'm saying that correctly, climb their way onto the boat.
Every way is correct.
Okay, great.
Like there's like a million different ways to. I say Sahwagan, which is similar to what you just said, but every way is correct because no one can agree.
It needs to be done with an Australian accent though to make it perfect.
Yeah, I become more aware of my Australian accent the more I'm here. I don't think I've said cactus so much in my life, apart from the last few days.
We haven't had to interpret anything today though on the panel.
That is true. There's been no translation necessary. Speaking of translation, I'm going to translate this email that Callum sent in. Actually, I lie. Callum didn't send this email in, and I make this point specifically to make sure that people know you can comment on Spotify. It's a real thing. If you're listening on Spotify right now, open the app, go and look. You can put a comment there, and 3 weeks later, I will remember that exists and pull your question. But I thought this was an interesting one. This might bring the mood down a little bit. I'm not sure. Callum's asking about losing animal companions in a game. How would you handle the death of a long-standing and beloved Beastmaster companion? I'm going to kind of asterisk there as well, like familiars or any sort of party pet that mechanically in the game goes to 0 hit points and dies within the context of the game. Would you use resurrection, respec the class so that they're like, if it's a ranger, let's get another subclass for you instead. And now there's that, I'm going to cry, hole in your life now. Spirit companions where they're fae, so they just kind of reincarnate every time. How have you handled it in your games in the past?
I've mostly had to deal with it in the context of running for children. And I make it very clear to them because kids always want an animal companion, even if they're not a class or a subclass that deals with animal companions, they're going to want one. And so first, it's a conversation between you and that player, right? I let them know, if you bring your animal companion into combat, it is a member of combat. It may be targeted. And they may accept that, they may not accept that. But if they do accept that, they have to make it very clear that this is a consequence of the game. I'm not punishing you, but it's a consequence of the game, especially if that animal companion is doing very well in combat. But it's a conversation between you and that player, right? Like maybe if they've lost their longtime Beastmaster companion, maybe they want to just kind of go on being a Beastmaster without those Beastmaster abilities, right? While they decide whether or not they might want to have another companion, or thematically another companion will come up to them and you give them that opportunity. I haven't had to deal with it a lot, and I'm grateful that the rules kind of make it so that you nowadays, like Beastmaster Ranger, you can kind of like bring it back after a certain amount of time. But I really think it's really just a conversation between you and your player. What do you want to happen? after this? Do you want to take a break about it? Do you want to, how do you want to handle that? And then we have that conversation and we kind of go from there.
Yeah, a lot. You can learn a lot by how the player refers to their familiar companion. If they start out named like Fluffy the Fourth, you know that Fluffy the Fifth is on their way, right? Or if they, abuse them narratively, like, go run into combat. Then obviously if something happens, when I wrote Peril in Pinebrook, which we wrote for children to learn the game and learn to DM, I, as you said, LaTia, gave them a baby dragon that they had to take care of. That was the first thing that happened. And I had to put specifically for both adult and children DMs, they will not like it if the baby dragon dies. Do not harm the baby dragon in any way, shape, or form. The whole point of having the baby dragon is to get the baby dragon back to its nest. Don't touch the baby dragon. The end.
Clearly not a Grim Hollow adventure, because I know exactly what I would do.
It would be a baby vampire dragon by the end of the...
That's what I meant. That's exactly what I meant and nothing more. Simpatico. Yeah.
It's like we've been working together closely for a while. I know what you're thinking, Ben Byrne.
Joe, have you ever had to deal with this or dealt with this in your game?
Slightly, though. My experience is a bit different. So I have a gaming group of friends that have been playing together since university. And I have one player in my group who is notorious for misremembering the rules in a convenient way for his player. Yeah. And it was at the beginning of 3rd edition, and he made a ranger, and he had a wolf companion that he never named. It was Wolf. Whatever. Oh yeah, I'm sending the wolf off to do this. And after 3 or 4 instances of, are you sure you want to do that? There's growls or something. There's the trees are moving. Oh no, it'll scout out what we need, so we'll be okay. Mm-hmm. And the wolf disappeared. And he was not at all heartbroken. So it was just another tool in his little matchbox of things that he could throw out to run with this character, but he wasn't invested. So knowing how the player feels about that companion, that animal thing, is hugely important in terms of how you respond to the unfortunate event if they disappear or go deceased.
The way the rules are written, at least the 2014 rules around Find Familiar and abilities like it, like the Beastmaster Ranger, is that if it dies in combat, if you lose it, you just resummon it again on a long rest or perform the ritual again or something like that, which mechanically makes sense because you don't want a player to have lost part of their character, like literally part of their character sheet. One of the things that gives their character utility in combat and in the game, you don't want to just take that away from them and they can't get it back. But from a storytelling perspective, it does not sit with me super well when I play with characters that are flippant with their familiars, kind of for that reason, and just, there's ludonarrative dissonance when they're like, oh, my familiar, I love them so much, my mouse.
Shawn, what does that mean?
Ludonarrative dissonance is the conflict between the rules of a game and the story that comes from those rules.
And then, they claim to care for it and give it a name and all that stuff, but then they just send it into combat. The one time this worked for me narratively was a living spell. It was the Scribe Wizard. Is that the name of the subclass? It was in Tasha's, I believe.
Yes.
And it got the living spell book, which we decided was an owl made of the pages of the book. Like its feathers were folded pages. And it had an attitude and it did not like getting sent in to just get like thwarted. And so every time he resummoned it, the owl remembered each time it had died. And was not cool with it.
I mean, that's also when your living spell book is like when you're sending your living spell, that's also a risk for the wizard. If you lose your living spell book, which is conveniently in the shape of a bird that you've decided to send into combat, that has mechanical effects for you where's your spell book? You've lost your spell book.
Sure.
So what is that?
I think we had linked, because you're right, now that I'm thinking about this more, I think what we had done was he had the Find Familiar spell. Narratively, he wanted his familiar to be the spell book, and so we kind of combined those rules together. so that when he resummoned the familiar, he just got his spellbook back without the need for that sort of thing.
And you as the DM, as you were saying, can give a personality to the animal companions, and make them a part of the world. If the player's not going to do it, you as the game master, I think, have the agency to do so, to make choices more interesting, to make story more interesting. Oh, this 7th familiar just passed. I cast it again. This next familiar comes out. He's giving you the stink eye. The imp is like, hey, boss, what happened with the last 7? Right.
Your living spellbook familiar has gone into combat and has died. He comes back. Where's your fireball spell page, man? You're missing a couple pages.
It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
Yeah, I feel like the Warlock patron has to allot a number of imps that they'll give you, and then, you've got 3 left after that. You've spent your budget, A question that came from M Ponygirl on YouTube, where we don't often take questions, but you can ask questions there, so do it. Last week we were talking about the stress of being a YouTuber and kind of the mental health pitfalls that come along with that, because it is a job kind of in an entertainment industry or in a hobby industry, but it comes with its own stresses that I don't think everybody realizes from the outside looking in. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that. And M Ponygirl asked, there appears to be 2 competing truisms in life, which is do what you love for a living and you'll never work a day in your life, which was kind of linking into a little bit of what you were saying a moment ago, Shawn. And the other one being the best way to kill your joy is make something you love a job for yourself, which I definitely resonate with and will elaborate on in a moment, but wanted to know how you 3 felt about those 2 kind of competing statements and how you reconcile them.
I'll start because I've had this conversation a couple of times this weekend and in the last couple of weeks, because it's something that I'm dealing with personally, not necessarily on a YouTube scale, but
sure.
Prior to working in tabletop role-playing games, I played a lot of tabletop role-playing games. And now that I work in TTRPGs, I don't, because it is my job and I don't want to. I work from home and I don't want to leave work, step away from my computer screen for an hour, and then come back to my computer screen to play TTRPGs with my group of friends who is primarily exists on the internet. But really, I think it's all about balance, right? If you really love what you do enough to want to make it a career, you need to establish what kind of boundaries, you need to establish the boundaries that are going to keep you both enjoying working in it and then being able to enjoy playing in it once the work is done. To me, it's finding other game-related things to do that aren't necessarily playing, whether it's, if you're like a game writer, you don't want to spend 12 hours a day writing. You do want to spend a little bit of time. You don't do it. Stop.
Shawn, put the laptop down.
Put the laptop away. But you want to take some time away from the aspect of the game that is work for you and do something else in that game-related space that is more enjoyable.
I'm so glad to hear you say that because I feel the same. And I have a weird sort of imposter syndrome, right? Where I spend my work days often writing a YouTube video or designing something for Grim Hollow or designing an adventure, even if it's just kind of an outline for an adventure for a freelancer to flesh out, or, hey, wouldn't it be cool if this character existed or whatever? And then I go home and I start prepping my home game. And because I love the setting, I want to play in Grim Hollow, but it doesn't feel like I ever got away from work. And it also doesn't feel like I'm like playing tabletop role-playing games. There's an aspect of it where my work brain switches on and I'm like, oh, that's interesting what the game master has done, or that's an interesting mechanic that this rule is doing, blah, 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 blah. And it creates a weird sense of imposter syndrome where I'm like, do I like this enough? Am I the problem? Am I like, people tell me how they play in 5 or 6 games a week, and do I not deserve this because I don't enjoy it as much as, other people who are involved in the hobby or involved in the industry? So I feel a kinship there, I suppose, in what you were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no such thing as imposter syndrome. We're just all a bunch of imposters, but we're doing it well. We are imposterizing so well because I mean, who are we
pretending to be?
Pretending to be. We're pretending to be all the people that are pretending to be the same thing that we're pretending to be.
Sure.
We're making this game
cycle.
that's supposed to be fun and bring joy to people's lives. What I do is, I work 12 hours a day. I'll admit it. But I'm like, okay, I'm working on lore here. Oh, let's switch over and work on this mechanical subclass. And then, I have a game tonight. I'm not going to prepare anything. I'm going to just play it by ear and have some fun. And I'm going to go to my players. I'm going to say, abuse me. This
is PG-13.
Do not treat me like a game designer. Do not treat me like Shawn, who is imperfect and should be picked on. And they happily oblige.
Sure. Joe, what about you? What's your experience with this?
I feel I'm really lucky in that the role I'm in, I get to switch the things I work on. So one day I'll be, we need additional 1,000 words for a book we're doing. So I'll hammer out the content that we need. Next, we got stuff from a freelancer. I need to edit down some stuff or carve out things, which in my head, from outside, you might say it's the same thing. You're working with words, but in my head, it's very different. Sure. One you're creating, one's kind of carving and shaping stuff. And then the next hour, I'm maybe helping my graphic designer put amends into our InDesign of the book, which is a completely different skill set. So I never feel overwhelmed of, I've been writing. I'm not Shawn writing a gazillion words in a given week. I get to spread my love around. What I have found since I've been doing this a lot is, and I miss, is I don't read as much because I'm overwhelmed with words the entire day in different aspects. And I pick up a book to read it, and either I'll start trying to dissect how the paragraph's been done, and I lose the fact of what I've been reading. For me, I actually look forward to going on vacation with my family and going through 3 or 4 books because I'm not going to be doing work stuff, and I can actually just focus on the novel that I'm enjoying.
Yeah, for sure. Linked into this topic, I saw a post, I don't know what social media platform it was on. It was on one of them. And it slightly horrified me because it was a mental health post about picking yourself up after you get kicked down, so to speak. And it was like, you're struggling in life because X, Y, Z things have happened to you. And one of those things that was in that post was you have failed to, or you haven't succeeded in monetizing your hobby. And that mortified me in terms of is that now an expectation that people have to find a way to monetize their hobbies to feel like they're worthwhile or successful? And this might sound odd coming from somebody who has the role that I have and is in the position that I'm in. But for me, miniature painting and wargaming as a side kind of note is my hobby that I desperately don't want to monetize because that is just for me. And please, people, note, you don't have to monetize your hobbies. They're hobbies. Keep the joy in something in your life, I think.
Yeah, I can speak to that. As I mentioned, when trying to get away from work, when work is also a source of creative joy, I've kind of returned to some of my former hobbies. I've played piano my entire life. I would like to get into crochet and things like that, but there is still that thing in the back of my brain. It's I went to my keyboard one day to practice, and I was like, I'm gonna also go live on Instagram because my followers will hold me accountable. And it's not the want to monetize it. It's just that I'm so used to being in front of people doing things that it's why can't I just do this for myself? Why can't I just sit at my keyboard with some sheet music and want to just do that without having having somebody with me, I guess,
I've had a similar experience of wanting to be could I stream a war game? Could I stream a game that we're playing?
Yeah.
But why?
Exactly. What is the desire to be visible while also trying to do a hobby that you're trying to keep for yourself?
I think the part of that instinct, honestly, because we had this with when we launched our Gamehole Kickstarter 2 weeks ago, we discussed whether to do a launch stream when the Kickstarter went live. And we were saying, like, will it, from a marketing perspective, will it really help? Will it not? People are already pretty excited for it. And we made the decision to do it only because I was just like, I want to hang out with people. I want to be excited with the community. I want to feel like I'm part of the community, you know, and make them feel like they're part of our little horror-filled community. And so I think that instinct comes from kind of a good place of wanting to feel that connection. But then you start to look at like, well, how many people are watching? What's the view count on this?
What it is that there is no place to just share.
Sure.
Every play, like most places are like, oh, you know, if you're going to stream, then you're going to stream on Twitch. You're inevitably going to get somebody who throws a couple of subs into the chat. So now you will have a tiny source of income from those like 5 or 6 subs. And then it's like, okay, well, is anybody else going to throw subs? Or like if I share on any other social media platform, it's like they're all coming up with ways to attempt to get you to monetize your posts. So you're just bombarded with it, you know? I can't just share because this site wants me to get premium and to get ad revenue, and this site wants me to, you know, do something else that might get me money on my post. There's just nowhere to share for the sake of sharing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that for me at the moment is Instagram, where I shared the miniature painting that I do. Occasionally throw out like a work-related post, but mostly I've made the decision to... that is just where I post whatever I want to, you know, picture of my cat, something like that. But the two are kind of social media as a thing. The two are kind of intrinsically entwined. The joy of sharing mixed with the value judgment on how people are interacting with that stuff.
I just heard throwing subs and got hungry because I don't even know what that means.
David has emailed podcast@ghostfiregaming.com and asked, what are some yellow/red flags in characters that GMs can and should push back on with their players in their game, sending their animal familiars into combat constantly and carelessly? Yeah, that's the question.
So many. I don't even know where to start.
Their name rhymes with Irwin and starts with Shawn, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm a living red flag. No, the biggest red flag is after you've had your session 0, whether it's for a whole session or for 5 minutes, if anyone is breaking that contract, even pushing toward breaking that contract, that's the red flag of, okay, let's stop. We had agreed blank. How are we really going to handle this now? Or if someone's behaving and it wasn't discussed, then's the time to stop and say, we never discussed how we were going to handle PvP. So let's discuss that now. But for me, it's about that social contract and where the lines are that you've drawn.
That social contract will define, because everybody's yellow and red flags are different, right? But when you have that social contract, it makes the yellow and red flags at your table uniform, which makes it easier to resolve this conflict.
For me, it's does the player contribute to the group, or are they trying to win the game?
Sure.
I recall I hadn't really played organized play previously, and my first experience with Pathfinder, and I was sitting at a table, and one individual was an Uberman Maxer, and he came and literally won the adventure because no one else at the table did anything,
right?
Because his character overwhelmed and dealt with all this stuff. And for me, that would be a yellow flag. Is this something that's really fun for the rest of the group? Are they aware enough of the people that they're sitting with to riff off them and help the rogue in the party that hasn't had any traps or sneaking chances to shine in a session? That's, I guess I'm looking for who are the good players that I want to include in my sessions rather than who are the ones that I don't want to include.
Yeah, I get you there.
And I think there are a lot of like stereotypical yellow and red flags, like the player who doesn't pay attention or the player who doesn't know what they're going to do when their turn comes up. But I think those are also indicative of wider table issues. Like, I am extremely neurodivergent. I will absolutely be on my phone during the game, but I'm going to know what I'm going to do during my turn because that helps me focus, right? Now, if we have a no phone at the table policy, then we discuss, well, what is it that I can do to occupy my brain while I am not, necessarily engaged, which will keep me engaged when it is my turn. So like I said, it is that social contract of establishing what your table is about, and then coming up with those solutions for not necessarily problem players, because they may not be a problem player. They just may need different accommodations.
Yeah, gotcha.
So figuring out what that is so that you have a good table experience all around.
Yeah. I just thought of the segue. So Dante, a little bit on this one. Speaking of budget, we are running out of our budgeted time for this panel. So we have time for one more question.
Just cut that in earlier.
That was smooth right there.
But we are actually absolutely out of time. So we're going to get out of here. If you have enjoyed this podcast, if you're listening to it online, you can give it thumbs up and stars and likes and things and do all that. That will make us happy, get us out to more listeners, all that sort of thing. You can ask questions on Spotify and on YouTube. I sometimes remember to pull them. And I would be remiss not to mention the Grim Hollow Transform Kickstarter is live right now as I'm speaking in this room. If you're watching this in November, maybe you can late pledge. I'm not sure. Anyway, I got to get out of here. So my name's been Ben Byrne, here with Joe Rasso, LaTia Jacquise, Shawn Merwin here at Gamehole Con, and we will see you next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. Ba-da-da-ba-da-da-ba.